Welcome back. I started working on this pump and thought I was recording, and was not. This is the oil pump out of the 1855. Pretty simple as far as getting it apart. Bolts going down through. Dowel pin here, and I guess that's the only one. The photo screen, which goes in something like this. And their design idea with the photo screen, it'd be in your tractor like such, is that it's always floating on the upper part of the oil, and that was the cleaner oil. The dirty oil, the crud, sunk to the bottom. Of course, that was designed for bypass filter type engines. It didn't do as good a job of filtration as these newer ones, even this 310, relatively new. And so they, I don't know, now the debate is whether you should sump from the bottom because the oil might be a little cooler down there. That's the idea behind it. Well, I can see a couple very light wear marks. Other than that, it's all machine surface, so that's good. The shaft doesn't turn on the, I guess we consider the idler gear. Has a brass bronze bushing inside. So far everything's looking pretty good on it. This is a relief valve, but the book says to not mess with it. It's factory preset, doesn't tell you how to adjust it, just says don't play with it. So I guess I'll leave that up to you as to whether you pull that apart. If you do, it's just a cotter pin going through a screw, and the ideal thing is to count how many turns it takes to come out and then put it back in the same number of turns. But oil gets sucked in this side, the gears turn, carry it around between the teeth, and then we'll put that back in. Each side carries oil around. As it comes around to this side, the oil can't fit between the teeth, and so it has to go somewhere. So it goes down through there, which is around the shaft that drives it. It comes out this hole and goes into the block where it goes to the filter housing. But at first glance, this one's looking to be in pretty good shape. If I remember right, sometime after it got overhauled, it wasn't having the best oil pressure, and they ended up getting a new oil pump on it, which has gotten ours since then. Overall, very minor wear marks on the teeth ends here. The end plates tend to be where most of your pressure gets lost. If there's a gap between the plate and the the gear, that's a spot where it can squeeze out. When it comes around here, it can squeeze over the teeth and go right to the other side, and that's got to be close, but not so tight it can't turn. So let's get this apart the rest of the way. I do believe there's supposed to be a roll pin in there, unless my eyes are playing tricks on me. There is not. I'm going to double check the book on that one. Well, the book says there should be a roll pin through that hole, but I am not seeing one. Thank goodness the press fit drove it. It says to drive this down through. If it was a gas one, you want to mark it somehow, because this slot right here is what drives the distributor, and it's offset to keep your timing with the flywheel. On diesel, it doesn't matter because you're not driving a distributor. It must have a pretty good fit if I was able to drive it all those years and not miss a beat. It says to actually press it out. We'll see if a few taps can get it. If not, no sign of moving in the hole. It's a tight fit. Guess I still want to mark it because that hole might not be on true center. Or maybe I should leave well enough alone. Here's the bottom of that oil pump. I've already started doing a little bit, but discussed it with Ross, the Oliver man, and he had a good idea. Basically lapped this. I got a piece of glass because it's nice and flat, and my tool bench top is very flat. I checked that for when I did that thrust bearing, and it's sure checked out pretty good, but this will kind of guarantee things. But that way, if there's any unevenness, these scratches are not very deep. I could just barely catch them with my fingernail. So figure just run across that and clean that up, and might help with the oil pressure situation. Can't hurt as long as it's good and flat and parallel and all that stuff, and that's where the glass comes in. So we'll just do that figure 8. You can see this is going to take longer than that thrust bearing, but I'll keep at it. Getting better, but I can see it's hopefully it's showing up. That's why I'm rocking it, so the reflection kind of shows. Still see machining marks in the middle, plus the couple of scratches. The outer part's getting pretty darn smooth, but that also tells me that it wasn't totally flat, or I'm screwing up. But got her on a piece of glass with a good flat backing, so trying to keep her as square as I can and all that good stuff. I'm gonna keep going, try to get her a little smoother. Barely catch my fingernail on those scratches and the machining marks. You can kind of tell they're there. They're not as smooth as this outer edge. More to go. Hey there, fella. He kind of looks indifferent, doesn't he? But after much sandings on the glass, lapping, got all the groove out on this one. A little bit showing here. Still some original machining marks right there. So hopefully this makes it better, because either I screwed up or that thing kind of had a dish to it, which is very possible. I don't know what kind of oil pressure it was generating before. The bearings that were in it look pretty good, so I might do just a little more. Definitely looks better than it did. Just room for a little bit more. I get down too much and there won't be room for the snap ring. And what I should have done is just taken it to my friendly neighborhood machinist and had him put it on the mill and true it up. And then if this needed countersunk a little more to make room for the snap ring, he could have done that at the same time. I will throw it together. I think there's still going to be room. I will throw it together and make sure everything turns free. And if it doesn't, well, then I guess we'll have to clean that up. Not sure how well it'll show up on screen, but I've got just a little bit of the original machining marks right there still, but even they're knocked down some. Just a little bit of that scratch left in a couple of spots. The other one is, boy, you can just see the shadow of where it was. A lot better. Hopefully my glass and everything stayed true, and so did I, doing all this lapping, because that was a couple hours worth of arm exercise. Should have taken it to a machinist and had him face it up and get it all true again. So I'm going to wash this up and do a dry fit with the oil pump and make sure that that it all turns freely and everything, and that I didn't mess up somehow or another. And then I'll do the final assembly by doping up the gasket and torquing it down and get it ready to go back in the engine. Well, apparently that had a good press fit, but we're not going to take that chance. I've got a roll pin here. It might be a skosh long, but we can grind off the excess. Don't want it sticking out where the oil pump or the camshaft teeth, where any of the teeth are going to hit it and cause issues. So I need to find a... Oh, I just got new roll pin punches. I can try them out. Let me get this in a vise. I find a piece of old round baler belt works really good for gripping stuff that you need a good grip on, but you don't want to mar any surfaces or anything. That thick rubber is going to protect it, but grab good. And then my new roll pin punch. Got a whole set of them. Those are in my Amazon store. What they do is they got a round tip, and the roll pin sits right on that. It's even better for driving them out than in. But the punch is just the right size to go through the hole without binding. It stays centered and it drives on the edge by staying centered, so it doesn't mash the roll pin to where it's going to drag more. So it just kind of, they're worth the investment. They weren't too, I don't know, they weren't that much money. Now if I can get this to stay somewhere where I can show. I think that's showing up. We'll drive this side flush and grind whatever came off the other side. And just a little bit came out the other side, but could file it off, but come on, I got power tools for that stuff. Although filing might be more precise. Yeah. Let's see, is there room for everything? I guess you'll see what you see. I think that went well. All right, now I get to wash it again, but yay for new punches. Well, I was thinking there's a dowel pin here and a hole for a dowel pin here. And I was thinking it was missing one, but when you look at this, there's only one dowel pin hole. So I guess it wasn't missing anything. As we saw before, the faces down there, just from turning it and looking, looked really good. So I'm just gonna slide this in there with the gasket. Put a couple bolts in it. Make sure nothing's binding. I guess that helps keep things lined up since there is only one dowel pin. You can't get this on wrong. Probably should be putting some kind of, I will lube it up, but for the moment. Maybe I should lube it up. Oh, we're down to the pin. So far, even without lube, it's turning nice, so I don't think anything's misaligned, because the shafts are all but fully engaged. Turns nice and smooth. That's not cranked down, but there is still a little end play. I'm sure not as much as we're going to take out from tightening it down. Now I got to get it back apart because of that dowel pin. I bought 2 gaskets just because there's always a chance one gets ruined, and for what it costs to ship anything anymore, a second gasket is cheaper than the shipping. That was one of the gaskets I did not have on hand. Let go. There she goes. Well, it made a nice suction sound. Okay, let me get some lube. Pull that gear out. Yeah, that other face looks good. And so does it. Just by turning this one. So, even though my goal was to just trying to clean up some of the scratches and stuff, what I really found was this plate was warped down all around the edge. It was not true. It took a while it just kept working its way in all the way around to the center, and pretty much there. Like I say, I could just see some machining marks in this part here, just a touch of that scratch right there, but I think I'm going to call that good. It's much better than it was, and that's probably another hour's worth of sanding. I think I mentioned earlier, but as it pumps oil, pumps it up this side, comes up through here. That's where it feeds into the rest of the engine, or well, into the filter housing and all that good stuff. But you got a bushing up here. Of course, it's under pressure, so it's going to try to push through up there. So that squirts oil out there. There's a hole here with a groove, so that squirts oil up this way, and that's what makes sure that your gears are getting lubricated. Is that little hole right there. Of course, like I say, there's a little bit squeezing through past that bushing, so that's another reason to have that bushing in tip-top shape. I feel just the tiniest amount of movement in it. I'm going to not mess with it. You could lose your pressure to this bushing here, so that's another place to lose it. Just having that dip in here is going to let oil slip past the gear lobes and come around underneath and push through to the other side. So this should improve performance by lapping this and getting it all true and everything, getting a lot of those scratches and stuff out. I am going to put some of this lube, assembly lube, down in here, run it upside down. Try to get it to flow into that bushing. Not seeing red coming out, which I guess is kind of a good sign. You don't want the oil to come instantly pouring out, because then there's too much gap. But I can feel like it turns a little smoother now. So I think we got down in there. That this thicker assembly lube, it's going to stay in place better and make for better, fill in any little gaps, help it get better suction that first time it's cranking up, so that it can get primed up as fast as possible. So now if I put this one, we'll put a little, there are bushings in here. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a small hole to let a little bit of oil push in through that bearing. Oh yeah, she's stirring it down in there good. A little bit on the teeth, a little bit up here on the face for good luck. Yeah, I can already hear the suction noise, and then it ain't even got a lid on it. All right, I forgot to get gasket dope. I'm having a little pushing button problem of not pushing record at the right time. But it's all together. Bolts all torqued down. Let's give it a listen. Hey Ross, does she sound familiar? So we'll get the photo screen in. I'm going to see if I don't have a little bit bigger diameter than this. This fits in there pretty good, but tighter is better. That's what we like. That fits in there, but just can barely even turn it by hand. There. I think that oil pump is ready for some installation. One last time being upside down. You might be asking, why haven't I put the head on yet? Now that raises the center of gravity on this engine stand, and I want to basically get all the lower end stuff done while it's easier to rotate, less weight on it, center of gravity stuff. So that's where we are at. I need to get the oil pump in, obviously. And as you've hopefully seen, depending on which order I put these videos in, I've gone through the oil pump. It's ready to go back in. Just needs a little lube on the gear teeth and drop her in. Now, if you're doing a gas engine, there's a slot in the top of here. That's where the distributor engages. So it's important, and that slot is offset slightly to one side. So it's important to have that facing the right way to have the distributor timing where it should be. And in our case, this is a diesel, so it doesn't matter. I could still line it up, but it's not gonna change a thing. So I'm just putting her in. No gasket for here. 2 bolts. So we just stick her in and try to get the teeth to engage. There they go. Get our 2 bolts in and torque them down. Get on there. Earlier, Oliver's only ran a single bolt on their oil pump. They bumped up to a couple of them. And these later. Let's see, that came out nice and flush. These gaskets are sticking up just a little bit. I'll trim them off. And then I like to put where these are. Normally I shy away from silicone, but this could be a problem area for them to leak. So I'll put just a little dab of silicone on there, and same back here. But first I need to check the oil pan over. Oh, I'm not sure how well you can see down in there. But, well, there it is. I was worried about the bolts being just a little too long on that fuel pump I added, but no, they just flush with the inside of the block, so perfect. Getting full thread engagement. The one ain't totally tightened down, but the one is. Just fitment at this point. Typically, I have to hammer down each one of these spots where the bolts go, because someone has over tightened them. This one really appears to be in good shape. Guys just get carried away with these and distort the pan, and then all the pressure is where the bolt's at, and you don't get any right in here, or they actually get so far that they actually start slicing the gasket with this line here, and it doesn't take that much pressure. Yeah, and it's probably because any service like this, they always brought it back to us. But usually I just take a hammer and get it over the edge of a bench or something. Give it a little tap just to flatten them back out. But I'm just not feeling or seeing any dome shape to them. So that's good. The oil pan's been, I put it in the electrolysis tank, and then it's been sitting since last year. So there's a little bit of surface rust and dirt on it. So I went over it with a wire wheel and one of these things. They work great. Then Scotch-Brited over the whole thing by hand just to get any little nooks and crannies, get any stuff loose, blow it out. So I think that is ready to go on. Cleaned up those little edges here, so I'll get my my silicone ready. One last double check. Looks like everything's in there. I guess I got video evidence to help myself realize that I did torque everything down. One quick thing, some blocks will have they'll have the oil pressure relief here. That's the majority of them. Some of these cooler blocks, which I've had a few people ask, and while this isn't the original block, this tractor did throw a rod at some point in its life. The very late 1855s did come with the 1955 block with the integrated cooler, oil cooler. So this is technically the right block for this age, but even if it wasn't, I would be putting one in. And then some of these blocks have the relief valve built right in here. You'll see a plug there or there. And this one has neither. It all relies on the relief valve built into the oil pump, which all the oil pumps have that. I always kind of thought it was redundant myself, but I guess you could set the oil pump a little higher and then be able to adjust from the outside, but that's not going to be the case with this one. And as I said earlier, there's not much procedure in the book about adjusting this oil pump. Essentially, don't mess with it is kind of their language. All right, bottom end. Hopefully this is the last time we ever see you. I like to work from the center out, kind of like the head gasket. Usually if you watch right in between, I can see it's wishing out just a little there. The gasket starts squeezing out. That's plenty. Not much force at all. Squeeze, yep, right there. Let's get some light on the subject. Yep, just a little bit of squeeze. It's easier to tighten it up some more later than it is to put a new gasket in. I think that's it. Probably ought to put the drain plug in, you know, so I don't forget that later. And one last roll for the old girl. Find the dipstick. So is your tack drive leaking? It's a pretty easy fix. There's just two clamps that hold this down into the block, and then you can pull it out. And all the parts you need are just this 157 176A gasket that goes underneath it, and the 106 212A seal that goes in the end. Pull this drive shaft out. There's a little oil up past it. pop out the seal and put in a new one. I'm going to pop out the seal and then clean everything up first. That's the same gear that drives the distributor if this was a gas engine. So there's an offset in that slot, and there is on this too. It's hard to see, but looks like it's a little bit higher there. It looks like it's higher there. I put a little bit of assembly grease inside of here. There's a bushing in there, put a little lube because the seal ain't gonna let the oil by normally. Let's see, I thought I had it. Looks like that way. There. Looks concentric. And it'd probably help if I put the gasket in there. Okay, so this time with the gasket, I've got it in the drive unit, and I do believe it's like that, about like that. There, that dropped right in. Turns easy, so I guess I got it in the right spot. Let's turn it 180 degrees just to see if it'll turn hard if I get it in wrong, or if it'll turn at all, or if it'll drop in at all. Doesn't look like it'll drop in unless it's in the right spot, but never say never. I've seen some guys pull off some pretty interesting stuff in my time. And all that holds it down is the same clips that hold a distributor in place. Snug it down and you're good to go. A little postscript from the future. I've been getting a lot of questions about the oil cooler block for the 1855, and many are surprised this has an oil cooler block. There's actually a couple variations. The original did not have an oil cooler. It was just a pad on the side here with a filter on top, filter housing, and but it's still turbocharged. That was one of their mistakes, because a turbo puts a fair amount of heat into the engine, and you got your oil going up, it lubricates the turbo, and that turbo has got exhaust going through it, so it's hot. And so not only does it lubricate it, it helps keep those bearings relatively cool, get some of that heat out so seals and stuff don't get ruined from the extreme heat. And then it gets returned in the oil pan, so your oil gets a lot more heat than it would with a non-turbocharged engine. So Oliver's first solution, and from the get-go, let's jump back a little bit. From the get-go, the 1955 used this block with this cooler. So they were using a turbocharged 310 with a cooler, a little more horsepower. They thought at the lower horsepower of the 1855 they could get away with it. Not a good choice. So at first they started the 1855 regular block, no oil cooler. Well, they start having troubles. So one of their solutions was an add-on oil cooler that bolted on to the filter base and then had a couple of hoses. Actually, Rossi Oliver man has one. So let's cut to him and he can show us his 1855 with the cooler base.
All right, so this here is the first variation of Oliver's attempt to add some type of cooler on the 310. I talked a little bit about this back in a video. I don't know when. I'm sure that can be linked in, but anyway, I always thought that this was an aftermarket job because I've seen them on other brands of things, this same shape of cooler. And I'll get a better shot of how this looks. And when I overhauled this motor, I had trouble finding the O-ring or whatever was at the bottom, because I believe it's a square cut O-ring and it fits in a groove or fits in something with tabs. I can't remember. But anyway, it took a few attempts to get something that would seal up and not leak. And basically, this works just like the later factory cooler. I mean, coolant circulates through there, the oil goes through some fins, and then it lowers your oil temperature. I thought this was an aftermarket thing for a long time, but when I looked in a later revision of the parts book, I did in fact find that this was in there. So I guess my parts book that I have at home, paper, must have been early enough that it wasn't in there back when I was doing this or something. But anyway, it is in fact in there, and you can see that it comes with all the stuff. This number, this is a Napa filter, but it changes over. The AGCO number changes to this, so I know that this is indeed the setup. I've seen these things on eBay, but I have not ever seen like the center screw that you need to change it over, or you know, any of the seals. But AGCO did show the O-ring last time I looked, so that's good. I probably should order some to have them on hand. But you can see it's just hooked in with some coolant hoses there, and I tried to, you know, keep everything in there where it's not out of the sheet metal. Sometimes when people put cabs on them, things are sticking out farther. But anyway, so that is definitely better than no cooler, but there's really no way to tell, you know, what kind of difference it's making. I guess I could plug off these hoses and run it all day, but I'm really not willing to take that risk because it runs pretty good and it has about 50 pounds of oil pressure almost all the time. So I don't really want to do anything like that to just experiment, but I would say that it is helping, because you can tell the longer you run a tractor during the hot days, you know, as the temperature goes up on your gauge, the oil pressure drops, and this keeps it, I mean, under wraps. Like I said, I think the lowest that it'll get is like 45, and that's after you've been running it a long time and it's warm and hot, I guess I should say. So maybe that would be different if you worked it hard. I haven't really, I guess I baby them too much, probably more than they should be, because if it sounds like it's working hard, I usually shift down, you know, either hydraulic shift or take the lower gear in the transmission and go again. So I'm sure it could stand more than what I do to it, but probably now the only thing that I do with it really is pull that soybean planter and maybe round baler mainly. Back when I built this motor, this was the big horse, so I used it to do everything. And probably the hardest job it did was pulling that 6-bottom plow, and I didn't even do that all the time. I just mainly did that for some entertainment. So anyway, if you have this style cooler, this is in fact the first attempt at adding some type of cooling system on the 310, because it did not come with that. It just had a sock filter like the naturally aspirated.
As you can see, that does do a little bit of cooling, but probably not nearly as effective as the larger cooler. If you watched the previous episode, you saw the cooler that's inside of here. It has the corrugation inside to give it even more surface area to pick up heat from. Coolant goes in, coolant comes out. So better heat transfer than the add-on one. So that happened in 1974, which this tractor was built in July of 74. So it came from the factory with a cooler block. They late 1855s did have the 1955 cooler block from the factory. There is a serial number break, but 1974 I guess is good enough for what we're doing here. Now, unfortunately, this tractor still threw a rod sometime in the 80s. Even with that, these throat 310s are notorious for that. Part of it was in the one-piece wrist pin. Well, they originally had two-piece wrist pin bushings. This has been updated to one. Hopefully I covered that in earlier installments. Wrist pin halves could separate out, float out, and if one of them came out, then the piston could get cockeyed in the hole. It's ever so slightly, but it's enough for it to wedge, rips the rod in half, throws the other half of the rod out through the side of the block. Other problem was rod bolts weren't necessarily strong enough, and I think some of that goes back to that wrist pin bushing. So they updated those, and but they didn't do all that in the factory. About the only real big update came from the factory was this oil cooler block. Now, earlier versions, and this one probably came from the factory with it, as you saw earlier in this video, had plugs going into the block and the side of the block for oil pressure regulation. Earlier versions, and the book shows that there still would be one right here, but this one obviously does not have it. It still has to have the drilling, because that drilling goes all the way through to the main bearing to feed that, and then they cap it off with a plug. Same reason there's a plug right there. There is one under here, it's a cap, and another one back there, and then plug for each main bearing. So there's 7 of those all together. I have pretty much determined this was a replacement block. In the last episode, we saw that the cooler inside of there, the heat exchanger, was dated 8 of 78. Right here, they would stamp assembly dates. This says 12 of 8, or no, 12/3. Is that an 8 or a 3? That's an 8. Yes, it's an 8. 12/8, which that would have been an assembly date. And then the casting around on the other side, pay no attention to all this other stuff you haven't seen installed yet. We're from the future. 1198. So I would say this was cast on January, maybe if I get it like that, January 19th of 78 would be my guess. And then it also has the last digit of the block, which was usually like an A, B or something, I don't know. But anyways, they ground that baby off and stamped something else in, because this block ain't quite the same because of those oil galleys and stuff. So my guess is when it threw the rod back in the 80s, these were still available from parts as probably a short block, and that's probably what they did to get it the newer version. And that explains the dates of both the cooler and the block. Block cast in early 68, between different processes of pickling and machining and whatnot. I can see why it took until December for it to get put together. And then that would go along with the heat exchanger being built in 8 of 78. So that's where she stands. That is the story of the oil cooler on these 1855s. Yes, some did actually come with a factory oil cooler block. The majority did not. Any questions, feel free to comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them. The 1855s, they did not add on a bypass filter, although there is a T there where I could add one in if I really wanted to. And I may possibly do that if I can find one off a 1955 or a 1950T. A little extra filtration's all right, as long as I got good oil pressure to start with, then yeah. But the way that splits off from the turbo, you're using some of your turbo oil and losing some of your pressure. It's not a true bypass filter. The filter's got enough restriction to slow the flow down, so it doesn't filter a lot of oil, but it filters it finer than your regular one. So it kind of gives you a little extra capacity, a little extra cooling from that slow passage through the canister, and a little better filtration. So I guess that's the end of this one. Hope everybody enjoyed. I'm probably creating more questions, but that's fine. Like, how did the head get on there? And let's see. Oh, I'll cover this. Someone asked about the fuel pump. I thought I had this covered. Most of them did not come with a fuel pump. I had this on hand. When it comes to priming up the fuel system, You want to have your fuel tank chock full. I really don't want to do that right off the bat. And other times it's just when you're changing filters, it's so much easier to bleed them out when you got that little hand lever down there and can pump. And also relieve some of the load on the injection pump, which does have a pump inside it to push fuel into the main part before it gets put to really high pressure. But that causes more work for that. And so I am putting a fuel pump on it. It does show in the parts book. So that's where we're at. Oil cooler block. I appreciate everybody watching, and we will see you in the next one.